Nearly 20 years ago, my brother and I each picked up a copy of Metroid Prime Hunters on the Nintendo DS. While there was, of course, a single-player adventure mode, the main point of interest for me was the online multiplayer. In 2006, most of my online and local multiplayer game time was being poured into the Halo series. We were just a year out from Halo 3 launching on the new Xbox 360, Halo 2 was the go-to sleepover game on the original Xbox, and I was still playing Halo Combat Evolved on PC nearly every day. So while many Metroid Prime fans were picking up Metroid Prime Hunters as a portable entry in the Metroid Prime series, I was picking it up as a portable, online, first-person shooter. Now don't get me wrong, I did play through and enjoyed the single player at the time, but it was never the main focus for me. I was playing several rounds a day, bouncing back and forth between Spire and Sylux as my two mains, and keeping track of my rankings on the official website. You have to keep in mind that online first-person shooters like this barely existed as portable games in 2006, especially ones that ran as well and looked as good as Metroid Prime Hunters. This was an arena shooter that you could bring with you anywhere. It was even an early example of what would come to be known as a hero shooter, a year before Team Fortress 2, which is often credited with splitting off the subgenre from earlier class-based shooters. While it is certainly a product of its time, Metroid Prime Hunters doesn't really get the credit it deserves in the history of online shooters. Over the years, I've revisited Hunters a few times, on original hardware or on its virtual console release on the Wii U. But without functional online servers, this generally amounts to a few rounds against bots, and perhaps the opening hour of the single-player mode. But with Metroid Prime 4 on our doorstep, and Sylux finally getting his long-overdue moment in the spotlight, I figured I'd replay the entirety of the single-player campaign for the first time since launch. And folks, I gotta say, it is fantastic. Set between the events of Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, Metroid Prime Hunters tells the story of Samus tracking down a telepathic message from an abandoned system of planets. When she arrives, she quickly realizes that she is not the only one there, and for the first time in the series, we are introduced to a variety of other bounty hunters. The opening hour or two is extremely linear, with straightforward visits to each of the 4 explorable areas, 2 space stations and 2 planets. Within this opening, you'll have a few scripted encounters with the other hunters, who serve as mini-bosses for your initial visits to each of these areas. When I've revisited Hunters in the past, I generally set it down at some point during this initial tour of the system. This gave me a lingering impression over the years that Hunters is an extremely linear game. So it was honestly kind of a shock when, immediately following this sequence, the game completely opens up. You are given no indication of where to go next. You just know that you need to revisit all these places and look for new areas you couldn't previously reach. Progression gating in Hunters is handled entirely by alternate weapons. One of the complaints often lodged against Hunters is that beyond new weapons, Samus doesn't really get any other new abilities. You'll start with common abilities like the Charge Beam, Morph Ball Bomb, and missiles. Samus won't find any new armor, alternate forms for her Morph Ball, or abilities like the Grapple Beam. It's admittedly a somewhat simplified version of the Metroid formula, but it didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. I think a lot of that acceptance of a simplification comes from an appreciation of just how much Hunters is doing to try to replicate Metroid Prime within the extremely limiting confines of the Nintendo DS. When Metroid Prime released on the GameCube, one of the things that stood out was the way it streamed its massive world without obvious loading screens. Now and then, a door would hang for a moment as the room beyond loaded into memory, but it gave the impression of a unified world. It did that all with some of the best visuals on the system and a smooth 60 frames per second. The fact that Metroid Prime Hunters does the same thing with incredible graphics on a Nintendo DS is remarkable. Are there compromises? Yes, absolutely, not the least of which are the very obvious loading hallways, but even these function in a fascinating way. Anytime you move between 2 large rooms, you'll walk into a small hallway. These hallways exist because the harsh polygon limit on the DS can't store more than one of these large, detailed rooms in memory at any one time. What's cool is that there are actually only about 2 of these hallways per region, just to give it a little visual variety. And they aren't actually part of the map in a traditional way. Anytime you leave a room, you are loaded into this liminal hallway space. If you walk across the hallway and shoot the opposite door, the door behind you will close and the previous room will unload from memory, and the room in front of you will be loaded in. In fact, if you open your map immediately after shooting the door and causing the room swap to occur, the map will briefly not know where you are. The hallway you're in isn't actually physically part of the map, so during that moment where it's disconnected from the previous room and the next room has yet to materialize, you don't exist in either space, so the map just literally can't find you. It's weird when game design starts to feel like some sort of strange quantum mechanics stuff, but sometimes we just get there. Metroid Prime on the GameCube had similar looking memory management techniques, but it had the bandwidth to store a couple of rooms at the same time, so the interstitial hallway sequences in that game are much more traditionally implemented. But once again, that all just highlights what I find so impressive about this game. Despite harsh limitations, they squeeze in so much detail to every environment. Your ultimate goal is to collect 8 octolith crystals, which can be used to open up a rift into the dimension in which the race that once inhabited this area of space sealed a creature called Gorilla. I actually really like this final area in which you encounter Gorilla. Throughout the game, the lore you've been picking up references this sphere in which Gorilla has been contained within this dimension. You land within this strange organic structure, and upon walking out into the open, you can just see the sphere hanging there in the sky. There are no other enemies here, and it gives the place a very cool, haunting atmosphere. Collecting the 8 octolith crystals requires defeating ancient security systems, and here is perhaps where we see Hunters struggle under its own weight a bit. You see, despite 8 crystals that need to be found, there are only 2 boss encounters. These are used repeatedly, with only minor changes to make them more difficult in later parts of the game. It's a definite weak point, and I have to wonder if requiring you to perhaps gain the crystals from other hunters instead, in at least a few instances, might have helped to break up the monotony. At the same time, if I play devil's advocate, the Mario series, especially the 2D half of the Mario series, has been pulling this exact same crap for literal decades, and they all get crazy high review scores. I'm not saying that means it's not bad game design, but I do have trouble giving Metroid Prime Hunters on the Nintendo DS too much of a hard time for it when Super Mario Wonder has the exact same problem. But of course, the main reason I wanted to go back to Metroid Prime Hunters was to reintroduce myself to Sylux. Now, it was no real surprise when Sylux showed up in the trailer for Metroid Prime 4. Anyone who has been paying attention to the Prime subseries saw Sylux following Samus at the end of Metroid Prime 3 and stealing a Metroid egg at the end of Metroid Prime Federation Force, because you all definitely played that one, right? But what surprised me, looking back on Hunters, was how clearly Sylux was positioned even then as being more important than the other hunters. Throughout the game, you'll periodically encounter the other hunters, sometimes even fighting each other rather than you. In the event that you lose a fight to a hunter, they can steal an Octoloth, and you'll have to track them down to get it back. Where each hunter is in the system is constantly changing, so it's a pretty cool mechanic to find what planet they're on and then go look for them. The first time you encounter Sylux, things start out pretty normal. You chase him around the room, whittling down his health, but unlike the other hunters, this first Sylux encounter has a phase 2, in which you chase him into an open-air room and his ship flies in and starts taking shots at you. This mechanic is completely unique to this encounter with Sylux. Later on, the game hints at another encounter with Sylux by giving you a glimpse of his ship flying over you. Once again, this is something that only happens with Sylux. It's clear that even at this point, Sylux was being built up as something more than the other new hunters. Interviews from the time and since indicate that Tanabe and the team at NST put a lot of work into the backstory of each hunter, and that Tanabe had a particular affinity for Sylux. It's just wild in retrospect how clear that affinity is within the game itself. revisiting Metroid Prime Hunters in 2025 has been a gaming highlight for my year. It's not a flawless game by any means, and a lot of that comes from how remarkably ambitious it is, sometimes maybe too ambitious. But to some degree, Hunters feels like the game that Metroid Prime 4 is set to be a sequel to, far more so than the rest of the Prime series. And I think that's awesome. It's incredibly unlikely, but I'd love to see this game be revisited in some way. I think both its multiplayer and single-player components have a lot to offer, and it's a game that has only become more critical to the Prime series with each subsequent entry. Beyond the single player, I think Metroid Prime Hunters still makes a solid case for the Metroid universe as a viable online shooter series for Nintendo. From the Hunters in this game to those introduced in Metroid Prime 3, it feels like a spin-off that deserves to be followed up on. I'm very glad that I randomly decided to play through this one again before Prime 4. I didn't actually intend to make a video about it when I started playing, I just figured it was something that I would do for fun, but I then wound up having a bunch of opinions about it. What this game accomplishes is remarkable, and it deserves to exist in the same space and in the same conversations as the numbered Prime games, now more so than ever. But that's all from me. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and consider subscribing to Nintendo World Report TV. You can find a whole lot more at nintendoworldreport.com, and if you'd like to chat with us about this or anything else Nintendo related, you can join our Discord using the link in the description. If you want to reach out to me specifically, you can use the handle on screen to find me on your social media platform of choice. My name's John Reardon, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.
This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.